And I got to tell you, it's a very helpless feeling when law enforcement decides to frame you. And I know a lot of criminals make such claims. Well, I'm not a criminal, and all the state documents now in Alaska show that. Hi, folks. Tim Sundles here again, filming from Africa at our ranch here. Um, My wife, who's a retired district attorney, elected district attorney in the state of Wyoming, has talked me into doing this video. I was reluctant to do it because I don't want to sound like an embittered victim. Um, but there's so much information here that needs to be told and shared to, it just needs to be shared with the average person that goes up and may or may not someday hunt in Alaska. Um, and I'm going to do this by memory. I may be off a year or two on my dates. Uh, so going back to around 2015, a man by the name of Adam Onsrred owned uh, a production business to do outdoor type and hunting type videos, which he was putting on one of the hunting channels. And he did other videos with me, elk hunting in Idaho, and they ran on one of those hunting channels. I quit watching them years ago. They were more and more of the same. Anyway, I invited Adam to go with me up to the Brooks Range. I had booked a hunt with an outfitter up there, and just for moose. And Adam came along as cameraman so he could do an outdoor movie, hunting movie on this hunt. I killed a bull moose, a nice bull moose, on opening day. So Adam and I were left up there with several days of nothing to do. So we found an old mining camp that had some pans and shovels, and we just decided to pan for gold. And we did a lot of hiking and exploring too. Well, I have never had this happen before, but every pan had at least one nugget in it. I mean, you're talking about very rare, rich strike in this little stream. I don't think even had a name, but I kept panning, and every pan had a nugget, sometimes two. That's unheard of. It's anyway. So uh, at the end of our time hunting, I went back to Fairbanks and filed a claim with the Alaska DNR. And the next year, Adam and I went back. We took equipment in, and while we were back there, we hunted moose and we killed big bulls. Um, we wanted to make sure we did things legally because this is off the Hall Road corridor, the Dalton corridor, and there's specific rules about how you get back there and how you haul your game out. So at Coldfoot, Alaska, we we sought out an Alaska state trooper by the name of Scott Lanier, who was stationed there. And Scott did like a lot of cops. He wore a cam and recorded our conversation, which was just fine with me. Um, for the next 2 years, Adam and I went back there and legally harvested moose um, according to the instructions that Lanier had given us. And it was probably on the third year of doing this that Adam and I were back on our mine, putting in our requisite hours on the mine to maintain the claim, and doing a little more searching, prospecting, and finding more gold in more places. We were going to enlarge our claim. Well, we both killed bull moose that year as well. And while we were in the process of being back there, Adam's InReach SOS was accidentally activated. So all kinds of people came back there looking for us. And folks, I am much older than Adam, and I don't carry that electronic BS with me. And Adam knew how I felt about it. Uh, it's just more moving parts. Gosh, how did people survive in the wilderness before we had all kinds of satellite locators and all this other bull crap? If I get killed back there, I just feel like I have it coming. Um, I refuse to carry those in-reach devices and devices that'll send SOS signals. I do at times carry a satellite phone, and that's as far as I'm willing to go on modern devices. I think it's all a bunch of horse crap. If you can't go back in the wilderness and survive, then I mean, if you want to bring your electronic devices and all that, go for it. It's just not my style. Um, anyway, everybody came back there looking for us. Alaska State Troopers, search and rescue, federal people, because the SOS got accidentally activated. Not really. Took a day. Mm-mm. Well, and my wife is here monitoring what I say because I tend to forget things when I'm doing this kind of thing by memory. Long story short, the Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Division got involved, and they knew what we were doing back there because I had cleared it with Scott Lanier a couple of years earlier. When Adam and I came out and got to the trailhead at Coldfoot, Trooper Tim Abbott intercepted us and really gave us the ninth degree, issued us citations for taking moose illegally, confiscated all of our gear, including our boots. And the interesting part was we flew the moose out. The moose were legally tagged. They were sitting there on the airstrip. And I told Tim Abbott, I said, there's no argument we harvested moose. There is an argument that we did it illegally. You don't need our boots. You don't need our cell phones. I'll share anything on my cell phone with you here and now, but I don't want you taking it. And he said he had probable cause rights to confiscate our cell phones and we'd have them back in a week. Yeah, well, we got them back 8 months later after filing motion after motion to get them returned. At that point, it was a moot subject. But Tim Abbott left us up there with no boots, no survival gear, confiscated everything that we had, no cell phones, no means of communication. And so we drove back to, I mean, we had 6x6 Polarises, rifles. The only thing he didn't try to confiscate was my handgun, which was a 500 line bar. There probably would have been fireworks over that. I knew what they were up to. I told them the truth, but Tim Abbott was bound and determined to find some kind of charge. He wrote us tickets for illegally taking moose, which were inaccurate. Anyway, we get back to Fairbanks, and they'll never admit this part, but they had a tail on us, uh, who we finally just pulled over and waved at. It was a lady driving a Rubicon Jeep. She followed us from the cell phone store to the Harley Davidson's store where we had a friend we just went and talked to. She kept showing up. I need to teach him how to do a tail. First, you don't use an attractive woman that people might notice. Secondly, you don't use a vehicle that people might notice because her Rubicon was customized. It really stood out. We finally just pulled over and waved at her, and that's where the tail ended. so, so stupid for them to do. Anyway, um, as I hired the best attorney, by the way, that money can buy in Fairbanks, and this man is overqualified to be in Fairbanks. His name is what's his name, babe? Yeah, Joe Miller. Can't believe, I can tell I'm getting up there in years because Joe Miller's a friend. I love Joe Miller. He's hunted with me since then down in New Mexico. Um, Joe Miller's a good guy. He's brilliant. He's your typical negative attorney and can basically only think of the negatives because that's how he's trained. Um, Joe Miller represented me and Adam quite well. Uh, and because I'm a kind of guy that doesn't have enough spare time on my hands, I agreed that if the state would give us all of our gear back and the moose meat, it was too late for that, but the moose antlers, um, I agreed to plead guilty and pay a $7,000 fine. And, because the amount of time I was spending on this was costing me a lot more than $7,000. Plus, I really wasn't looking for a fight. I have better things to do. So I pled guilty, paid a $7,000 fine, and then went back up to Alaska. I did all this from my home in Idaho, um, and then went back up to Alaska to get all of our gear because the state troopers were holding it. They had spotting scopes. They had our Swarovski binoculars that were rangefinder binoculars. They had rifles. They had our 6x6s, all of our hunting gear that they had confiscated. Well, Tim Abbott confiscated it. And when we had a court order returning all of that, including the moose antlers, and my wife flew up there with me. She wanted to see more of Alaska. And so she went with me, and keep in mind, she's an ex-district attorney. So we get to the Department of Public Safety, which is where the state troopers hang out to get all of our gear. And I told Joe Miller, my attorney, to please come with us because um, seeing some of the stuff that Tim Abbott was doing by falsifying evidence, um, I just thought that I should have my attorney present. And by the way, if you try to look this up under Tim Sundles or Adam Onsrred versus the state of Alaska, it's hidden. It's hidden from public view. And I know why. The state of Alaska is highly embarrassed because we haven't reached the end of the story here yet. So they're giving us our gear back, much of it which was damaged, I think intentionally, by Tim Abbott. Um, Tim Abbott refuses to give us some of it. He said, well, the judge was wrong. Now we've got a written court order to return our gear, all of it, including the moose antlers. Well, he wouldn't give some of it back. He said, no, I'm withholding that. The court is wrong. Now, Tim Abbott, if you know anything about the American judicial system, has no right to do that. That's actually illegal, as were some of his other actions I'm going to get into, which is why I ultimately ended up with all my money back from the fine I paid and no charges from what I pled guilty to. So Tim Abbott um, slapped us with a civil suit, both me and Adam Onsrred, while we were there collecting our gear, and refused to give some of it back. Um, and I guess there's a way for state troopers to civilly sue you if they disagree with the court's decision, which is mighty hinky. And so I pulled my attorney aside, Joe Miller, along with my wife, and I said, Joe, there are some things that are just a hill to die on. Not only are they not obeying the court order, which means they're disobeying the court order, but they're suing us. Tim Abbott is suing us civilly, which is different than a criminal action. And I said, I'll die on this one. I'll fight this one to the death. Doesn't really matter how much it costs or anything else. This is illegal bullshit. So we sued the state of Alaska. And as it went through the legal process, the state of Alaska was losing each hearing. And they kept making offers to settle. Well, I wasn't interested in settling until the offer was good enough. And I really shouldn't have settled as easily as I did. But on probably their third offer, uh, they agreed to pull up the the illegal taking of moose charges that Abbott had filed and reinstitute them or make them live again so they could dismiss the charges and return my $7,000 check fine that I had paid. And I said, that's a good enough admission of guilt. Um, at the behest of my attorney, Joe Miller, who advised me to take it. I still think we could have got a better settlement, but I got better things to do than fight with Dillwad cops. Now, keep in mind, I am pro law enforcement. So is my wife. We are not pro corruption in law enforcement. And I'll say that over and over. When law enforcement decides to falsify evidence, withhold exculpatory evidence, and do such things, they enter into criminal activity themselves. And I'm not for that. And let me just tell you a little bit about what Tim Abbott and Scott Lanier did. First of all, they went out of their way to withhold exculpatory evidence during the discovery process. And they also introduced false evidence and false testimony. That stuff's illegal. And it was turning into a frame up. And I got to tell you, it's a very helpless feeling when law enforcement decides to frame you. And I know a lot of criminals make such claims. Well, I'm not a criminal, and all the state documents now in Alaska show that, but they're hidden from the public. I wonder why. So I won't get into all the evidence that was exculpatory that they withheld, and I won't get into the false evidence. I'll give you one small example. Scott Lanier provided parts of his taped conversation with us that could be used to convict us. But the parts that were totally exculpatory, he lost. He just lost it. Never mind, they were in the same taped session. So you lose part of it, you don't lose the other part. Come on. Um, and there's evidence of record during the discovery process that Lanier lied about, and Tim Abbott really lied about it. That guy is a bad egg. And just so you know, Tim Abbott was forced in 2019 to resign from the Alaska State Troopers and to surrender all of his law enforcement credentials so he can never work in law enforcement again. And that was probably because the state of Alaska was looking at him because of my case, but it was on other falsified documents he filed with the FAA, where he basically stole an airplane and took possession of that airplane, was trying to make it his, wasn't his. Um, and a big part, in my opinion, of the Alaska state troopers confiscating Hunter's gear is, they get to buy it later, um, which is a major conflict of interest. It goes up for auction. The state troopers know what's going up for auction. They can get custom rifles or ATVs. Um, so, talk about corruption. And I don't have the case number here in front of me. I just agreed to do this last night at my wife's behest. Um, but it's all public record, and anything I'm saying is public record. My attorney has the case files, and everything I'm saying can be proven. And my wife to this day can't believe that cops will disobey a court order as Abbott did and not return all the gear. But bottom line, where this ended up is I had pled guilty to the illegal taking of moose, the charge that Abbott filed, and paid a $7,000 fine. Hang on for a second. What, babe? Oh yeah, I wasn't guilty. I pled guilty because I didn't have time to deal with it. I was spending a lot more on it um, than the fine than was involved in the $7,000 fine. And the courts had agreed to return all of our equipment. If they hadn't agreed to that, I never would have entered a guilty plea. Anyway, they had to bring the charge back up, even though it was a closed case, and make it live again so they could dismiss it. That was part of my agreement with them to drop our lawsuit. And they had to return my $7,000. They had to return Adam Onsrred's $7,000 because they knew that we had them by the balls. Well, yeah, then in the history of the Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Division, once they've confiscated a moose, they've never ever returned a moose. Well, all that was left was the antlers because at that point the meat was a year and a half old. So they they returned our antlers, which was Tim Abbott's sticking point actually, because he said that's never been done before. I'm not gonna be the first one to do it, even though there's a court order saying to do it, which Abbott has no right to make those decisions. That's the judge's decision. Anyway, oh yeah, my wife's making another funny point. Interestingly, every state trooper that I've ever talked to up there that's carrying a Glock Model 20 is shooting buffalo bore ammunition in it because they have to put down dangerous moose or they have to put down grizzly bears. And our ammo just has a wonderful track record of doing that. Um, I know they're mad at me and they're going to be really mad when they see this video. And believe me, I've left 98% of this out just to keep this video short enough for you to watch. But basically, the Alaska state troopers that I dealt with are corrupt. Again, they withheld exculpatory evidence, which is illegal. They provided false evidence, which is illegal. Yet they're using it against people that they deem criminals. And so, who's really the criminal here? If you're in law enforcement and you obey the laws about evidentiary procedures and material, and you're an honest cop, my wife and I both support you 100%. But if you're crooked and have conflicts of interest and break laws so that you think you can uphold other laws, you're a corrupt son of a bitch. And we don't support that activity at all. And my stepdad uh, was for a while Portland, Oregon City policeman. My genetic father was for a time an Ada County uh, deputy sheriff, and and my stepfather was a Korean War combat vet. It's not like I'm not close to these people, but neither of my fathers were corrupt about it. They upheld the law by keeping the law themselves during the process of upholding the law. Boy, I can tell you some stories about being a 14-year-old on patrol with my stepdad and actually having to use his spare 357 in his defense and at 14. I mean, back then things were much more lax than they are now. That's another story for another time. I've been around, I've seen a lot because I'm old and I lived in a different generation where government was generally a good thing. It's become so corrupt that in a lot of cases it's generally a bad thing. Um, I will leave you on this discussion with we won, the bad guys lost. the bad guys being Tim Abbott and Scott Lanier, and Scott Lanier didn't do nearly as much as Tim Abbott did, but he still lied in official court proceedings. I'm sorry. I don't care if you're protecting your brothers in blue or not. Stop lying because you're destroying it. You're destroying the entire law enforcement process for the honest cops. And you're creating less and less public trust. You're destroying public trust. And I noticed one of the verbs written on the Alaska State Troopers vehicles is integrity. Yeah, another one's bravery. Well, you're a coward when you're in a position of such authority that you lie and withhold exculpatory evidence and fabricate damning evidence. There's no bravery there. You're a freaking coward. There's no integrity there either. So I watched this Alaska State Troopers show on TV and I want to puke because they make these guys out to be helpful to the citizenry and considerate of people, which I'm sure some of them are. It's just that the ones I've dealt with were corrupt bastards. And like I said, Tim Abbott had to resign and give up all his law enforcement credentials. I don't know if Scott Lanier is still with the Alaska State Troopers, but as far as I'm concerned, um, he needs to be forced to resign. We need honest government, honest law enforcement, and we need it. And I agree with it. I don't agree with corruption in government of any form. Get rid of it, get rid of the bad eggs. Now, folks, this can all be looked up. The state of Alaska has hidden it from public view. I tried to Google all of it this morning before I did this video. It's not available. But case numbers can be had if somebody wants to challenge me. Everything I've said here can be proven if somebody wants to challenge me. Um, all of my experience in life has been outdoor related. That's what I've done since I was 14 and 15 years old. I've been outdoors, shooting stuff, using guns, using archery, fishing. I I have been um, I have been, as Richard Mann calls me, the modern day Jeremiah Johnson. I've done those things. Those have been my interests. So all of my experience with government, or most of it, has been with uh, usually fish and game departments, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Park Service, U.S. Forest Service. That's where my experience has been. And I can point out many, many, many cases of flat out corruption, which I'm not done telling these stories. I mean, the Forest Service hates me. And were Donald Trump to bring me in and say, how do we reorganize the Forest Service? I'd give it a good looking over, and then I'd probably eliminate the entire U.S. Forest Service. They don't do anything anymore. They don't manage forests anymore. They don't do anything except cover their ass and make bureaucratic regulations that hinder people, good citizens, from using our national forests. Well, yeah, and people are going to say, well, they put out fires. Well, guess why there's fires? 50 years ago, the Forest Service quit doing logging contracts because they were sued by their partners in the Sierra Club and other so-called conservation groups. They're actually anti-conservation, and so the Forest Service just quit doing logging. Well, when you quit doing uh, logging and management of your national forests, they overgrow into fire hazards. So now we have massive forest fires every year in the western states. I mean, massive fires. And the U.S. Forest Service claims, well, we provide a valuable function by putting the fires out, when in actuality, they're creating the fires by lack of managing and logging in our national forests. I mean, Talk about circular thinking. We need to draw a firm line. We need actual honesty and lawful governance. Anyway, folks, may God bless, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you for tuning in.